Officer Mark Reynolds never forgot the night he first rolled into Oakwood Drive. The darkness that smothered the neighborhood was more than a simple power outage. It felt alive. His flashlight flickered feebly against silent houses, each window a dead eye staring back. There were no street lamps, no comforting glow under doorways. Even the moon seemed swallowed by the sky. As he stepped from his patrol car, an unsettling hush closed in, so absolute that he heard the rush of his own pulse. Somewhere ahead, a creaking porch swing moved on its own, an unspoken warning to turn back before it was too late. Night had long settled over Maplewood, New Jersey, turning the colonial-era houses and tidy lawns into vague silhouettes beneath a sky of cold black. Officer Mark Reynolds, a seasoned veteran of the Maplewood Police Department, was near the end of an otherwise uneventful shift when the dispatch call crackled over his radio Unit 12. Be advised, multiple 911 calls from Oakwood Drive. Residents reporting a complete power failure, unexplained sounds. Some claim an overpowering sense of paranoia or panic. Please respond immediately. For 20 years, Reynolds had answered calls in Maplewood's quiet suburbs. Nuisance complaints, suspicious vehicles, the occasional burglary. But something about the dispatcher's uneasy tone set his nerves on edge. He'd never heard them sound frightened before. Clicking on his overheads, he turned off Springfield Avenue and made a beeline for Oakwood Drive. Within minutes, as he neared the designated street, his radio began to fizzle with static. The crisp, familiar voice of dispatch turned to faint hissing, then dropped out entirely. Puzzled Reynolds tried the radio a second time. "Dispatch, this is Unit 12. Do you copy? I'm approaching Oakwood Drive." "Over." Only a hollow crackle replied. It was abnormal to lose contact so close to the station, but he told himself it might be an antenna glitch. More pressing was the unsettling darkness up ahead, a gloom that swallowed the gentle glow of Maplewood's distant street lamps. Before he even turned onto Oakwood, his headlights speared through a wall of black that seemed thicker than any night he'd ever seen. He eased the patrol car onto the empty road. Row after row of houses sat in uncanny silence. Their front windows, typically warm with lamplight or the flicker of a TV, were as dark as unlit caves. Even the few leftover Halloween decorations that some neighbors kept on their porches looked more menacing by the minute, ghostly silhouettes swaying in a dead air. Reynolds noted his surroundings with a disquiet that sat heavily in his chest. No lights in any windows. No faint rumble of a furnace or refrigerator. No voices, no barking dogs, not even the chirp of a late-season cricket. It felt as if every sound in the world had been extinguished, replaced by a suffocating quiet. He parked near a cluster of ranch-style homes, leaving his headlights on. As he stepped out, a wave of cold air swept against him. Something in that wind carried a hint of mildew or damp earth, a smell he normally associated with neglected basements and abandoned cellars. His breath plumed faintly in the night, colder than it should be for mid-autumn. His pulse quickened, a primal wariness creeping up his spine. He tried to recall the last time he'd felt this uneasy on duty. Several years back, he'd responded to a call of intruders in an abandoned warehouse near South Orange. By the time he arrived, a group of trespassers had fled, leaving behind only eerie silence and scattered footprints in the dust. That location had unnerved him, but it paled in comparison to what he felt here. Still, he pressed on, shining his flashlight across manicured lawns and silent porches. A disconcerting thought formed in his mind. Where is everyone? Even if the power was out, the residents should be awake, peering anxiously out windows or stepping onto front stoops to see what was happening. Instead, Maplewood's Oakwood Drive lay as still as a photograph. Reynolds began a methodical approach, moving from house to house. His flashlight beam revealed each driveway empty of movement. Most of the front doors were locked tight. He tried knocking and calling out, "Police department, is anyone inside?" Each time he was met with heavy silence. Every unanswered door heightened the tightness in his chest. It was as though the entire street had been vacated in the span of a few minutes. But how could that be possible? He flicked on his flashlight's higher beam, setting, scanning for any sign of a broken window or forced entry. Nothing. Everything looked normal except for the absolute blackout and the oppressive hush. Occasionally he'd see flickers at the edges of his vision, shadowy shapes that seemed to dart away the moment he tried to focus on them. The first few times he dismissed them as tricks of the beam or an overactive imagination. But with every house he cleared, that sensation of being watched redoubled until he found himself constantly checking over his shoulder. Goosebumps climbed his arms inside his uniform jacket, not from the cold alone, but from the abiding sense that something or someone lurked just out of sight. He tried his radio again, pressing the button with unnecessary force. "Dispatch, do you read me? I need an update on the power outage." "Over." Static answered. He twisted the knob, switched frequencies, tried the station's direct channel. No luck. The radio might as well have been a children's toy. When he reached the midpoint of Oakwood Drive, he spotted a row of 3 connected townhouses. The center one had a front door hanging slightly ajar. The motionless door looked like a mouth half open in a silent scream. Reynolds approached slowly, the squeak of his boots sounding unnaturally loud on the concrete walkway. He shone his flashlight on the door, revealing chipped paint and scuff marks near the bottom. Had it been forced, it was impossible to tell without closer inspection. Heart thudding, he nudged it wide with his foot. Calling out Maplewood PD. "If anyone's in here, please identify yourself." A hush swallowed his voice. The only hint of movement was the last flicker of his words echoing in the hallway, as if in response a chilling draft spilled out. He stepped inside. The townhouse's interior was pitch black, the kind that devoured the flashlight beam after a few feet. Immediately, Reynolds noted an unnatural drop in temperature. It felt 20 degrees colder than outside. The hair on his arms and neck prickled in alarm. The layout was typical of Maplewood's older construction, a narrow corridor leading to a living room, stairs to the left, ascending to a second floor, a small door to the right that probably led to a basement or utility room. Framed photographs on the wall captured snapshots of a happy family, a man and woman smiling on a beach vacation, 2 children in their Sunday best. In the beam of his flashlight, their eyes took on a glazed sheen. Reynolds paused a moment, listening. The hush felt alive, pressing on his eardrums, as if to blot out anything beyond the sound of his own breathing. Then he caught a faint noise, like a whisper. At first he thought it was a draft sneaking through a gap in a window, but as he held his breath, the sound became clearer. A series of soft, urgent whispers, more than one voice, maybe 2 or 3, speaking just beyond his range of comprehension. He followed the elusive sound into the living room. The furniture looked undisturbed: sofa, coffee table, a scattering of magazines. Through a window he could see the top of his patrol car's flashing lights, pulses of red and blue that offered little comfort. In the gloom, every shadow looked deeper, sharper. Something fell to the floor in the kitchen with a metallic clang, a pot or a pan. Reynolds whipped around, heart pounding. He took a cautious step toward the darkened kitchen doorway, flashlight held high. Another whisper came from behind him, now drifting down the hallway he'd just left. His mind reeled. Was that a voice upstairs? Downstairs? Hello. Is someone there? No response, just an oppressive stillness. His own voice sounded too loud, and he worried that whatever was lurking in this townhouse might use his presence as a beacon. With each breath, a swirl of condensation formed in the light of his flashlight. It's too cold in here, he thought. Far colder than an ordinary power outage. Then the random recollection of an old wives' tale flitted through his mind. Cold spots. Isn't that what they say about hauntings? He had no time to dwell on superstitions. That stifling hush gave way to a sudden groan of floorboards from upstairs. His blood froze. That was definitely a footstep or something with weight. Cautiously, he climbed the narrow staircase. Each step complained loudly under his boots, sounding like a thunderclap in the eerie silence. His flashlight outlined the stairs and the hallway at the top. The instant his head cleared the final step, a wave of dread crashed into him. A door at the far end of the hall was cracked open. Beyond it lay darkness, yet something in that darkness felt aware like a presence waiting for him. He steadied his grip on his flashlight and inched forward, glancing at the closed bedroom doors to his left and right. The pictures on the wall's family portraits reflected the beam, giving each face a ghostly pallor. As he neared the partially open door, the whispering intensified. It was faint but continuous, like an urgent conversation happening just beyond a veil. He recognized no distinct words, only the soft rise and fall of multiple voices. Once again, he announced himself, half hoping he'd hear a terrified homeowner or a trapped child respond. Maplewood Police. Anyone in there? The whispering ceased. The silence that replaced it was so abrupt, so total, that the echo of his heartbeats pounded in his ears. Reynolds took a final step and pushed the door wide with a trembling hand. His flashlight revealed a small bedroom, presumably a guest room. The bed was neatly made, a lamp, and alarm clock stood on the nightstand, and a dresser crowded one wall. But the mirror above the dresser was askew, as if wrenched to the side by tremendous force. At first glance, the room appeared vacant. Then he saw the closet door ajar, darkness within. His flashlight skimmed the floor, pausing on a set of footprints in the carpet, leading from the door to the closet. They looked fresh, as though pressed in by someone walking barefoot with wet soles. He paused, trying to muster the nerve to check the closet. The entire room felt claustrophobic, the cold so intense that gooseflesh pebbled his arms under his uniform. The whispering was gone, replaced by an electric tension in the air, like the static hum before a lightning strike. Cautiously, he reached for the closet handle. As soon as he touched it, the bedroom door behind him slammed shut with a force that rattled the walls. He spun around, adrenaline surging. The door was closed, but no one was there. No one visible, at least. His heart hammered. His mind screamed for him to flee. Yet professional instinct held him in place. He yanked the closet door open, shining the light inside empty. No occupant, no hidden intruder. But the closet's interior wall was damp, as if water had seeped in from somewhere. An earthy smell wafted out, old moss perhaps, or rotting leaves. Then from behind him he heard the bedroom window squeak. Spinning again, he saw the window inching open with agonizing slowness. A freezing gust roared through the gap, scattering a stack of papers off the dresser. They fluttered wildly around the room. Enough. He backed out, threw open the bedroom door, and fled the hallway. The house itself seemed to protest his exit. Each floorboard groaned, each wall muttered in the hush. By the time he clambered back down the stairs, his lungs felt starved for air. He bolted through the living room and out the front door into the chilling embrace of the night. Panting Officer Reynolds stood on the porch under a sky devoid of stars. For a moment he half believed he was trapped in some surreal nightmare. The entire block remained cloaked in impenetrable darkness, lit only by the eerie strobing of his patrol car's emergency lights. The rotating red and blue splashed across the silent homes, giving the street a macabre carnival look. He glanced at his watch. Past 1 in the morning, but it felt like he'd spent hours inside that townhouse. He tried the radio once more. No response, only static. Gathering his composure, he shone his flashlight across the other houses, each as black as the next. Then, at the end of the block, something caught his eye. A faint glow flickered in a second-story window of a Victorian-style home. It was barely noticeable, like a single candle flame moving behind the curtains. Relief mingled with fresh dread. Perhaps a candle meant a resident was awake and aware. He hurried toward that house. The wind had picked up, carrying a peculiar hush that rustled tree branches and leaves, but provided no real sound. It was as if the environment only mimicked a breeze without producing the natural hum of night. The Victorian looked even older up close. Peeling paint, sagging porch steps, a few missing shingles on the sloped roof. But it was definitely occupied. He saw silhouettes of furniture through the windows. Yet no normal lights lit the interior, just that faint, flickering glow upstairs. Reynolds took the porch steps carefully, avoiding a broken board. The front door was locked. He knocked, raising his voice, "Maplewood Police. Anyone inside Powers out across the neighborhood." "Hello?" No response. He hammered again, heart drumming. The flickering glow upstairs vanished, leaving darkness behind the curtain. Then a muffled bump sounded from inside, like a piece of furniture toppling over, unwilling to leave potential survivors in trouble. Reynolds tried the door handle again. Locked. He circled around the side of the house, following a narrow path littered with dead leaves. A faint smell of gasoline and wood smoke lingered in the chilly air, intensifying that feeling of stepping into an older, bygone era. At the rear, he found a battered storm door that led into the kitchen. Its latch was undone. With caution, he pried it open. The door squeaked loudly, revealing a dark, cramped kitchen that looked more like a relic from the 1920s than a modern suburban home, antique cabinets, an old-fashioned stove, and a single overhead light fixture, powerless and dark. Slipping inside, he called out, "Paul," once more. The only answer was a creaking noise from somewhere deeper in the house, footsteps on the ceiling overhead. That was the first distinct sound Reynolds heard after entering the kitchen. They were heavy, deliberate, as though someone was pacing directly above him. Adrenaline surged. He braced himself for a confrontation. But just as he took a step towards the hallway, he heard another noise, a door opening behind him. He spun around. The basement door near the pantry had swung ajar on its own. From the darkness below, a nauseating odor drifted upward, mold decaying wood. Something else rancid. The stench forced him to clamp a hand over his nose. At the same time, the footstep sounds upstairs ceased. Silence fell once again thick and suffocating. Something about that basement beckoned him. Perhaps it was the sense that if answers existed, they lurked in that subterranean dark. Or maybe a primal curiosity compelled him. Whatever was happening on Oakwood Drive felt anchored to a hidden presence below the ground. He switched his flashlight to a higher lumen setting and aimed it down the rickety wooden steps. The beam revealed a dank cellar, with stone walls slicked by moisture. He descended each step, protesting under his weight. With every foot he went down, the temperature dropped further. By the time his boots hit the earthen floor, his breath formed thick clouds in front of his face. His flashlight panned across the room. Old shelves lined one wall, cluttered with canning jars, rusted tools, and broken antiques. Puddles of stagnant water glistened on the floor, reflecting the light in trembling patterns. Then the beam caught something else. Symbols chalked into the stone walls. They looked archaic, swirling lines that intersected in complex sigils. Some patterns resembled runes or alphabets long forgotten. Others were crude shapes that gave Reynolds an unsettling feeling of movement, even though they were just drawings. Ahead stood a makeshift altar, a tall, narrow table with candles melted down to lumpy stubs. The table's surface held a scattering of aged photographs, tattered newspapers, and a black-bound notebook. Beneath the table, a stack of older diaries or books. Reynolds approached, fighting the urge to recoil from the atmosphere of malevolence emanating from this setup. He recognized a few of the faces in the photographs. Maplewood residents from local missing person cases, some going back decades. A few pictures displayed families on front porches, some he couldn't identify, and others that looked disturbingly recent. His heart lurched when he spotted a photograph of the townhouse family he'd just encountered smiling in front of their home. Beside it lay a newspaper clipping with the headline, "Local Legend, the Oakwood Drive, Coven. Strange disappearances, unexplained." He'd heard rumors about Maplewood's past, a handful of hushed local stories about rumored witchcraft in the early 1900s, hidden societies that performed secret rites in the old-growth forests. Nothing he'd ever taken seriously. The official record was mostly folklore, but now faced with these bizarre symbols and evidence that people had recently been here, a horrifying realization set in. Something or someone had revived an ancient practice. On the wall behind the altar, a large chalk-drawn symbol pulsed in the flashlight's glare like an optical illusion. The lines seemed to shift if you stared too long. Feeling dizzy, Reynolds stepped back. Then from nowhere, the distant sound of chanting. Low, guttural, almost too faint to perceive. It resonated with the hush of the basement, setting the hairs on the back of his neck on end. Fear threatened to paralyze him, but training and instinct forced him forward. He reached for his radio again, hoping that maybe the stone walls wouldn't block the signal as thoroughly as the rest of the block had. "Dispatch. This is Officer Reynolds. Do you copy? I've found." A burst of static, then a whisper-laden hush. "D. Officer. Some safe noise." He couldn't make out the words. Frustration and dread churned in his gut. He glanced at the items on the table, noticing the black-bound notebook. With shaking hands, he opened it. Pages upon pages of handwritten text in archaic script he couldn't read. Interspersed with the text were sketches of the same symbols carved into the walls and horrifying depictions of people circled in black ink like they'd been chosen or marked. A wave of movement in his peripheral vision made him drop the notebook in alarm. Shadows near the stairwell rippled. He spun, shining his flashlight, but there was nothing there. Only the faint swirl of dust motes. "Who's there?" he demanded, voice echoing. Silence. But the sense of being watched intensified. He could almost feel breath on his neck, an unseen presence looming inches away. Suddenly, the flickering candle stubs on the table, the ones he thought were extinguished, burst into flame for the span of a heartbeat, flooding the basement with an orange glow. He caught a glimpse of a figure standing by the far corner, a tall shape, silhouetted features indiscernible. Before he could react, the candles snuffed out again, plunging the cellar back into blackness. His flashlight beam snapped to the corner, revealing only damp stone and empty air. Overcome with terror, Reynolds stumbled back. His hand brushed against the table, knocking the candles and photos to the floor. The chanting started again, louder this time, vibrating through the basement, as if the walls themselves were chanting. He had to get out. Heart in his throat, he sprinted for the stairs. It felt as though the darkness congealed around him, tugging at his clothes, slowing his movements. Each step up was a labor, but adrenaline surged through him like a lifeline. He emerged into the kitchen, slamming the basement door behind him. With a shaky hand, he twisted the deadbolt. Even if that gave him only a sense of security, he needed it. The footsteps upstairs resumed, crossing the floor above, with frantic speed, back and forth, like something enraged that he'd disrupted its lair. He hurried out the back door into the open night. The moment he was outside, the footsteps ceased. The flicker of candlelight in the upstairs window reappeared, but this time it glowed in furious pulses, as if reacting to the chanting that still throbbed below ground. Reynolds circled to the front of the house. His flashlight beam caught motion in the distance, a shape gliding between two dark houses. He froze. The figure vanished into the shadows before he could draw his sidearm or call out. His entire body quivered with adrenaline. He realized how vulnerable he was alone on this street, with no backup and no radio contact. The patrol car felt 1,000,000 miles away, though it was only a block down. Instinctively, he started to run, ignoring the searing cold that seemed to saturate the very air. As he neared his vehicle, he noticed flickers of movement behind him, glimpsed out of the corner of his eye. It felt like multiple figures darted between houses, keeping pace with him in the gloom. Each time he whirled around, all he saw were empty yards and silhouettes of hedges. The watchers stayed just beyond the flashlight's reach. He reached the cruiser, fumbling with the door. He hopped inside and locked it, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The engine turned over on the first try, which was a small mercy. But as soon as the headlights cut through the darkness, the entire block seemed to convulse with fleeting shapes sliding out of sight. Reynolds reached for his radio dispatch. For God's sake, do you read me? Something's... I need immediate backup at Oakwood Drive. Unknown number of people possible, cult or something else. They're in the houses, chanting. I need help. Static garbled the message. Then a half-audible response of Y 12. Hold P. Backup. Way. He couldn't be certain how much they heard or if backup was truly coming. Reynolds gripped the steering wheel, scanning the dark street. He debated whether to stay put or risk heading deeper into the neighborhood, seeking more survivors. The recollection of that makeshift altar haunted him. The photographs of the missing made him sick to his stomach. If people were in danger, it was his duty to help. Yet the silence weighed on him like lead. The shapes in the darkness didn't seem eager to approach now that he was in a running vehicle, but he sensed their continued presence. He sat there for what felt like an eternity, occasionally trying the radio in vain. Then in the eastern sky, a thin line of grey crept along the horizon. Dawn. As the first faint light of morning spread, a nearly audible sigh seemed to ripple through Oakwood Drive. Like a released breath, the shapes melted away into the gloom, the intangible watchers gone. Gradually, house lights flickered on one by one, as if some universal circuit had been reconnected. Street lamps blinked. Porch bulbs glowed. Within moments, the entire street was awash in normalcy. Families stepped out onto their porches, rubbing their eyes, looking confused but not terrified. Dogs barked. A neighbor in a bathrobe fumbled with a newspaper, noticing the police cruiser with surprise. A father hustled his kids into a minivan, possibly running late for some early morning activity. Reynolds blinked against the sunrise. The creeping dread of the night receded, replaced by a surreal dissonance. How could everything look so ordinary now? The next moment, multiple squad cars arrived, lights flashing but sirens off. The crackle of their radios was clear and strong. Sergeant Gomez stepped out of the leading cruiser, relieved to find Reynolds physically unharmed. "Mark, we got fragments of your transmissions. You sounded in trouble. What happened here? Why didn't you respond to the check-ins?" Reynolds could only gape at the street, the rows of homes glowing in the dawn light. The power was out. He managed his voice raw. The entire neighborhood, and there was something else going on. But as the day brightened, each resident insisted they'd slept through the night without incident. Some admitted they might have heard faint noises or felt uneasy, but with their power back, they dismissed it as a momentary glitch. A small group of officers accompanied Reynolds back to the Victorian house, but when they arrived, it looked different in the morning sun. Fresh white paint, a sturdy porch with no broken boards. The battered storm door he'd used to enter the kitchen was gone, replaced by a newer door with a pristine latch. A middle-aged woman answered. Her expression was alarmed at the sudden police presence on her doorstep. She insisted she had no idea what they were talking about. She led them into the kitchen, which was bright, modern, and well-kept. There was no door to the basement in the location Reynolds recalled. Instead, the basement entrance was in the hallway, padlocked, and evidently undisturbed. An officer forced the lock, and they all descended the steps. The basement was a small, cluttered space with boxes of holiday decorations and old furniture. No arcane symbols, no altar, no sign of anything unusual. Even the dampness was minimal. Reynolds stood there, fighting a rising wave of disbelief and frustration. He insisted there had been an altar, a vile stench, runic markings on the walls. But the basement was ordinary, sporting nothing more threatening than a few harmless spiders and dusty shelves. It was the same story at the townhouse he'd first entered, with the open door locked secure and inhabited by a thoroughly confused family that had apparently slept soundly. No sign of the frightening events, no open windows, no footprints. The temperature inside was normal, the place bright and lived in. The photos on the wall showed the same smiling faces, but not one was out of place or displayed anything suspicious. In the weeks that followed, the Maplewood Police Department filed Reynolds' account as an unverified incident. The official stance was that a brief power outage occurred possibly linked to a substation fault, and that many of the calls to 911 could have been triggered by panic or confusion in the darkness. Yet Reynolds knew better. He'd seen the basement with his own eyes, smelled the foul stench of decaying stone, heard the voices chanting. The photographs of missing persons from Maplewood's past still haunted him, as did the bizarre symbols etched into the walls. He spent hours combing through old archives, newspapers, and local legends. He discovered references to an old Oakwood coven, a rumored group of occult practitioners who met in secret to conduct rituals. The stories traced back to the late 1800s, with vague mentions of farmland that existed where Oakwood Drive now stood. One particularly disturbing account told of multiple disappearances in 1932, entire families gone without a trace. Rumors insisted they'd been sacrificed or spirited away by some malignant force. Town officials dismissed these accounts as hysteria or groundless folklore, but nothing about them felt comforting to Reynolds. Though the official stance was that no crime had been committed, Reynolds wrote an extensive report chronicling every detail. Sergeant Gomez read it quietly, then suggested he take some time off. "You've always been a solid officer, Mark," the sergeant said kindly. "But there's no evidence." The words stung. No evidence. Sure enough, everything that might have proven Reynolds's story had vanished with the night. Against advice, Reynolds returned to Oakwood Drive, off-duty parking discreetly at the corner. He walked the sidewalk in the daylight, noticing how families now laughed and greeted one another. Children pedaled bikes, dogs chased after tennis balls. The entire block radiated suburban peace. Yet he couldn't shake the feeling that beneath the normalcy, a dark undercurrent pulsed unseen. He found himself drawn to the Victorian house again. In the daylight, it looked like a well-maintained historical home, complete with a small plaque by the front door, proclaiming its heritage. He lingered on the sidewalk until the homeowner, a different person than the one who'd answered the door the previous week, stepped out and asked if he needed help. Confused Reynolds retreated, stammering an apology. A different owner. That made no sense. Later he tried to run property records. The house changed hands multiple times, often under ambiguous circumstances. The official records were incomplete. Some listed the occupant's name incorrectly, or the sale dates overlapped in a way that defied explanation. He also visited the townhouse from that horrifying night. That family was polite, if a bit baffled at his questions. They claimed to have lived there for 6 years, with no knowledge of any paranormal occurrences or missing family members. Their front door had a brand new lock and no sign of forced entry. Night after night, the same scenario repeated normalcy by day. A peaceful suburban street. But whenever he drove past in the late evening, a hush fell across Oakwood Drive, a weight that pressed on his chest. He swore the streetlights there dimmed just a fraction more than in other parts of town. Time dragged on. Maplewood's holiday season arrived with cheerful lights and a flurry of winter festivities. But for Mark Reynolds, the sense of lingering dread deepened. He had nightmares about chanting voices echoing through deserted houses, about drifting from room to room, trying to find survivors, only to discover a mirror reflection that stared back at him with black, empty eyes. He considered transferring to a different shift, or even retiring early. But something compelled him to stay. A stubborn sense of duty demanded that he remain in Maplewood in case that darkness stirred again. He found small signs that fueled his suspicions. A neighbor reporting a missing cat heard last near Oakwood Drive. A homeless man claiming he'd slept on the outskirts of town and witnessed hooded figures drifting through the streets at 3 in the morning. More stories brushed against Reynolds's ears, like fleeting ghosts of truth. Most of the department dismissed these accounts as random coincidences or urban myths, yet Reynolds could not forget the basement with its archaic symbols and mouldering air. He couldn't shake the memory of those missing person photos. Perhaps some supernatural presence awakened on Oakwood Drive that night, claiming an old territory that had once belonged to the rumored coven. Or maybe it never left. Each time he patrolled near Oakwood, especially on moonless nights, a suffocating silence encased the block. The houses seemed to turn their windows inward, as if guarding secrets older than the asphalt on which they stood. And each time, Reynolds recalled the radio's frantic static, the fear in his own voice as he pleaded for backup that didn't arrive until sunrise. He remembered the way the evidence vanished, leaving him a shaken witness to an unimaginable horror. Even now, years later, Officer Mark Reynolds remains haunted. In hushed tones, he tells rookie cops and curious neighbors about the lost night on Oakwood Drive, a night that doesn't appear in any official files the way he remembers it. Many write him off as overworked, perhaps traumatized by some other event. but he insists on the truth of his experience. He'll warn anyone who cares to listen. The darkness can hide deeper secrets than you'd ever believe. Sometimes it masks them so well that by daylight, there's nothing left to prove they ever existed. But never let your guard down. Never assume your own street is safe just because it's familiar. What you can't see can still reach out and claim you. If you've felt an unexplained presence, sensed impossible cold spots, or caught glimpses of figures in your peripheral vision on an otherwise ordinary night, don't dismiss it. Trust your instincts. Share your story with others who have encountered the unknown. Compare notes and stay vigilant. In a world where most mysteries are explained away, sometimes the unexplained warnings are the ones that matter most. If darkness ever falls too thick and too silent in your neighborhood, take heed and remember Officer Mark Reynolds' words. Never trust the darkness. Sometimes what it hides is watching you.